Hello, hello. I'm Anthony Pagnato. This is Kenton Grimes. We're both with Mohawk Global, and this is our podcast, Borderline Genius. Although I don't know if either of us are feeling like geniuses today. I think we're both feeling a little bit borderline, huh?
I am borderline and terrified.
This is our third episode. In our second episode, we gave some previews about what was supposed to come out on April 2nd, in which we had our very nice Rose Garden ceremony, where the U.S. government, specifically President Trump, rolled out his plans for reciprocal tariffs that we'd all been eagerly awaiting. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty on how these were going to be calculated, how these were going to be applied, and the potential burden to global trade. I, for one, will come out and say that I am surprised that they are as high in aggregate as they are. And I think my 401k has demonstrated that the market was also a little bit surprised. But we're going to walk you through a couple of things today. I hope you enjoy our time together, and I hope this provides some valuable information and you find it a little entertaining. Kenton, anything to kick off before we jump in? Anything you want to say? I like your terrified phase. That's a pretty good way to state it.
Well, the sheriff himself, I think, played fast and loose with the term reciprocal. That's where I'm struggling right now.
So we'll dig into that for sure. We'll dig into that. So reciprocal's been interesting, and I think a lot of people were surprised, and I think some of our smaller trading partners were perhaps a little surprised about that as well. But one of the things that I read this morning, and I'm curious as to any legal scholars' opinions and your opinion, Kenton. One of the things that I saw, just as a side note, was, and I truly don't think it matters at this point, take that for what it means, it is what it is, was a question about the executive's power to legally implement these tariffs. And for you that know, or for you that don't know, Congress has certainly passed the power to the executive branch to implement tariffs in times of national emergency. And I think that we can all understand the basic rationale for that. I think it makes sense. And I think we're seeing the current administration perhaps stretch the idea of national emergency in all of these cases. But at least with the original IEEPA tariffs on Canada and Mexico, there was the conversation about fentanyl and migration. I think some people found that to be tenuous with regards to Canada, and maybe a little less tenuous with regards to Mexico. But this round of tariffs are apparently based on the idea that a trade imbalance, our global trade imbalance, is a national emergency. And I think that that's reasonable debate, and should be debated. Again, I don't think it will be, but what's your gut tell you, Kenton?
I agree. I don't think it will be debated, but the term trade deficit, has become villainized, and I don't think it should be. It's not the same as a spending deficit or savings deficit. We're not talking about an imbalance in our budgetary issues. We're just speaking regards to, if anything, the wealth of our nation versus the world, where we can be mass consumers. I mean, it's kind of, again, my opinion, kind of silly to vilify the ability to procure products and services at a higher rate than others and somehow assume that the world is taking advantage of us.
But at the same time, I think it's fair to, and I think you would agree wholeheartedly with me, it is fair to accept the idea that globalization and it has damaged severely parts of this country. I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, and there was an enormous amount of conversation about how we would retrain the workers for tomorrow. And I don't know if we ever did, right, as a society. I don't know where those successes were made.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so again, I would strongly I have strong feelings that this is not an emergency that Congress contemplated when granting their tariff power to the executive branch. But here we are.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the dynamics of the globalization certainly created a shift in the economy. You know, speaking specifically as a child born in the 70s, you know, my dad was a steel worker, you know, so very much a blue collar family, you know, that I can't originate from. And I think about that, and I looked up some statistics on Bureau of Labor and Statistics, interestingly enough, the
How
manufacturing,
convenient.
how convenient that they have a nice little chart there that shows manufacturing earnings are right around $34, just a shade under $35 an hour. And professional business services, which I think as a nation we've gravitated to being more of a professional services economy. Those earnings are $43.60 an hour. So we've got a battle of industry perhaps brewing internally here in the US, where are we a services based economy or are we a manufacturing based economy? I think there is a bit of a tug of war.
When
And
there's a clear push by the current administration to reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing, which I
mhm,
don't think is a bad goal in as simply stated. But to your
mhm.
point, you know, I question sincerely and doubt profoundly whether or not we will ever have a manufacturing base in this country that is a mass employer at high wages that is demanded today to survive in the U.S. Simply due to the prevalence of automation. Right, automation
Mhm.
has obviously taken over so much of the manufacturing process, and I don't envision a world where the manufacturing facilities that could theoretically get built in the U.S. are employing swaths of young men and women at $40 or $50 an hour, right? And you know, uh, uh, I think you will see some serious robotics. In fact, I believe Tesla is heavily investing in robotic technology going forward. As an aside, but to get back to the original point, I'd love some comments from anyone out there that's got a legal mind. And again, I don't think it's worth real serious conversation because I don't think it's going to be challenged real seriously. That's where we are now and that's where we live. But from a theoretical study point of view, I'm curious as to what everybody's opinions are on the legality of our April 2nd reciprocal tariff announcement that was made by the president. Stepping from that topic, Kenton, you know, and you hinted to it in our introduction. Let's talk about where these numbers came from. I I'm not this is where you're a genius, right? And so I'm gonna count on you for this. But we all saw the awesome chart held up in the Rose Garden during the speeches. We've all seen it published online. A review of Vietnam and the World Trade Organization that I did, a very simple reading, shows, according to the WTO, which I'm
Mhm.
sure is fake news, but according to the WTO, the aggregate average tariff on U.S. products imported into Vietnam is 9.5%,
Mhm.
while the U.S. government in the with the attempt to justify a 45% tariff on Vietnam, claimed that the import burden into Vietnam was 90%. And we knew this, right, Kenton? We knew this was coming. I think we talked about it last episode, because the administration hasn't talked about simply tariffs that the other countries impose to us. They've talked about trade barriers. So they're claiming that the US government is claiming Vietnam has a 90% weighted average trade barrier. Help me out, sir.
So what there have been some people cracking the numbers, and specific to Vietnam, I believe they were referencing a $123 billion surplus from Vietnam. For Vietnam,
has
right?
$123 billion trade surplus with the U.S.
Trade surplus with the U.S. Right. So they took that number and looked at the exports of 136.6 billion. You know, you divide 123.5 by 136.6, you get 90%. At 90% became the weighted average, and then I believe in the sheriff's terms, he was going to be kind, so he cut that in half and gave Vietnam a 46% reciprocal tariff. Air quotes on reciprocal.
The 90% trade barrier is a ratio of two extremely macro level numbers, right?
Correct. Yes. Which is where I struggle with the reciprocity that we have in the term reciprocal tariffs. As you mentioned earlier, 9.5%, I believe, was the WTO's average duty rate on goods into Vietnam. There was a report that the UTR published, the U.S. Trade Representatives, USTR, published, showing different Vietnamese import duty rates. There were some exceeding that 9.5%. Specific to agricultural products. I think it ranged as high as 17. So I could, again, look at that and then look at the VAT taxes in Vietnam, which I believe are 8%, all referenced in that report from the USTR. I still struggle to find justification for a 90% weighted average. I understand the numbers that were used, but those are macro numbers that don't directly correlate to a microeconomic, something more sophisticated or surgical or just at a macro level. Like, we're talking individual tariff rates, not macro import numbers here.
So you pulled out some real numbers here, right? Real tariff numbers. You even included VAT, which you and I both struggle, and we won't go into that in depth because we can talk about it for hours. But we both struggle with the idea that VAT is any more of a trade impediment than U.S. sales tax is. But that's included. But reading some of the publications from the USTR and such, there have been quite a few other trade barriers.
Yeah, you could use the term trade barrier. I like to think of it as national sovereignty. You know, the U.S. has in this published report with the USTR articulated concerns over phytosanitary barriers, over food barriers, and to make it granular, there's some concerns over the Vietnamese desire to not purchase genetically engineered or genetically modified products. Well, I mean, let's be candid. Shouldn't they have the right to decide whether or not they want certain foods in their supply chain?
I certainly struggle with the idea that quality or choices on what to purchase as a nation run into that. I mean, we've happily, and I'm giving a silly example here on purpose, we've happily refused to import children's toys with lead paint in them, right?
Yeah.
So we have made a decision based on our
Hmm.
values as a country. And again, I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, but
Well, we no longer allow lawn darts. Again, you
yeah,
and I being raised in the 70s and 80s, we played with lawn darts. That's no longer something that you can import into the US.
thank
So,
goodness. You and I both being a little borderline instead of genius today, it could be dangerous.
oh,
So
but what a fun game. Way better than cornhole.
So we're looking at I totally agree with that. Man, you threw me for a loop here. I 100% lawn darts over cornhole. Let's unite. Um, so Vietnam's been one that we've talked about. Anything
Mhm.
else jump at you before we get into your future look into the crystal ball or
Uh,
prognostications, which I'll call for here in a minute?
well, one thing I think it's overlooked by the announcement is the inclusion of this Annex 2, which lists out a bunch of tariff codes specific to rare earth minerals and other things in the copper and brass and it articulates several different types of articles that are excluded. So unlike the earlier IEPA tariffs and the 301 tariffs, where we are seeing less exclusions being introduced, this is built in with exclusions, and there's language in the executive order to exclude this round of reciprocal tariffs on existing and future Section 232 trade barrier tariffs, which I think if you are utilizing a smart and sophisticated trade advisory team, can help you build your supply chain in a way to mitigate the expense. So there are Copper has a open investigation on 232 lumber and lumber derivatives. So we can, if you're a furniture importer, if you're somebody who's importing paper products, all of these things, you might be able to find reduced rates, reduced tariff rates. We're seeing these reciprocal or these 232 rates sitting around 25%, which, the 34% assessed to China on the reciprocal tariff would be wiped away, and you would get the 25% on the. So
And
yeah,
I want to make that crystal clear for our viewers and listeners. The 232 trumps the reciprocal. Period.
haha,
End of
Trumps. I
story.
like that.
Yeah, I got that right. It trumps the reciprocal, which could lead to some strange outcomes. And I'll say this knowing that this isn't a normal trade pattern here, but our friends in Sri Lanka, if they had a copious amount of steel that they could ship to us instead of clothing, which they've specialized in, would actually get tariffed much less, right? There'll be much lower tariffs on Sri Lankan steel than on the garments that are coming out of Sri Lanka, which are at 46 or 49. I can't remember the final number for Sri Lanka. Do you have it in front of
Sri
you?
Lanka ended up at 44.
44. A big number for a small island going through economic troubles.
Mhm.
Pretty interesting. And I'm gonna move into some prognostication for you, but I think that's important to remember here. 232 is Trump reciprocal, and that could lead to some odd situations. And
Mhm.
but let's talk about what you think might be coming next. I think you've done some interesting reading about India. I think there are some,
Yeah.
future-looking harbingers of what may be to come there. Let's hear it.
So, yeah, so on April 2nd in New Delhi, the Indian Express news service reported the Prime Minister finalizes the general terms for a bilateral agreement with the US. I find it interesting that this news, while reported in India, has not been published here in the US. I suspect we find out in the. I'm going to put a date on. I'm going to be really clairvoyant here and say on Monday the news cycle in the U.S. will announce the first success of this new reciprocal tariff is a deal in principle with India, reducing their tariff rate to hold at the initial 10%, but what I'm calling the peanut butter spread rate going live on the 5th. and that rate will hold until the agreement is finalized by legislation. So that's my prognostication based on just some interesting news clippings out of India.
So perhaps a win, right?
Perhaps a win.
U.S. trade and development, and it will be interesting to see. You see any other situations out there that are having these kind of conversations?
So that's the only one I've got better than a hunch on. This one I feel really strong about. I would not be surprised to see the EU come to the table,
Right.
mostly because there's a strong push for support with the Ukrainian war in Russia.
Sure.
And I could see this being a lever used by the administration for non-tariff related initiatives. So I could see an EU based agreement that might not have anything to do with reductions in VAT and tariff, but more along the lines of military spend on NATO and
Sure.
non-tariff related initiatives. So to me, this is just another lever that the EU is going to receive pressure with, and they might capitulate quickly.
And I think this is one of the huge challenges to doing business in the U.S. and I dare say the world right now, is that we've got a lot of the how, but we don't have a lot of the why. We have speculation as to the why. We have some statements as to the why. We don't know what the true aims and goals and benchmarks of this are. It makes it extremely challenging to do business. During the last Trump administration and through the Biden administration, the message seemed to be decoupling from China. And a lot of companies worked hard to decouple from China, moving right into Vietnam.
Yeah.
Right? Which is now pretty high on the list. And we're seeing some more favored, countries being, for example, the Philippines and Malaysia and Southeast Asia. But it makes it very hard and very unpredictable, to react to this. I think, for me, the big losers in all this are the penguins from the Heard Island and McDonald Island Group, who have been working adamantly to build their featherbed industry, and they just don't have the money to buy.
So that one obviously has made the run on social media. Interestingly enough, while his grocery list template during his press conference listed that country, they are not listed on Annex 1, which is the actual publication that is legal. So shame on his cabinet for allowing that to be on the list, giving him rise to some unnecessary bad publicity.
They don't have a Danielle watching their back like we have a Danielle.
We do.
So good.
Although I was thinking, if we went to the Heard Islands, the U.S. currency slipped today, but it can't possibly have slipped below the value of the local currency there. So we might be able to buy us some penguins.
They're not for sale, Kenton.
Oh, come on. Penguins are always for sale.
So thank you for your India comments. I appreciate your comments on the EU. And again, for all of our listeners, drop your comments. What's next? Who are going to be the big movers? Where are we going to see some potential wins for this? Where are we going to see some dissolving of long-term friendships and partnerships over this? I think it can cut both ways. As we tail off here, we want to end with.
Can I add one more comment? I think there is one more winner in all of this, and that is the local customs brokers handling the entries. Importers realize this is super complex, and I expect Uber Eats to be delivering pizzas to your customs brokers to thank them for dealing with this complexity for you.
Hey, man, we said it before, say it again. Please give a hug. I was going to say a kiss, but don't give a kiss. That's not okay.
Let's not do
give
that.
a hug, give a high five, give your thanks and gratitude to the U.S. customs professionals, customs entry writers, licensed brokers who are working day and night to make sure that import freight clears. And that cuts across all companies and such. It's a great group of highly intelligent people thrown into some really difficult circumstances as all of these laws push through, and the technology, the computers, the software we use to communicate with U.S. Customs is not updated and can't be updated in time to make these entries. So a big shout out, and I appreciate the shout out. Love your local customs broker, I think is the message, right? We should get that on a bumper sticker.
That'd be great.
Borderline Genius merch.
More merch. Now, I did see your LinkedIn post where you were talking about the new product from Subway, like a foot-long nacho tray or something. I'm sure most brokers would appreciate that.
I think that makes everything okay.
I think it does help. I mean, not what problem doesn't nacho cheese solve? I mean,
a difficult day of entries and acid indigestion. Oh my goodness, what to do? And I appreciate you calling that out though, and getting us talked down there, and so, but as we kind of tail into the sunset on this our third podcast, Mohawk Global is the premier customs brokerage and trade consulting entity in the U.S. Sure, I'm biased, but I'm also right. What can we do, or what can our very capable colleagues and competitors do? What can you be talking to your customs broker about right now, looking at all this increased cost square in the face? What can we do to support, Ken?
I mean, there a few points real quick. Never been a better time to review your classifications. Get an HTS review, evaluation assessment. Make sure you're paying what you should pay, not a penny more, and truly not a penny less. You don't want in any trouble. So
absolutely,
now's the time to get those ducks or penguins in a row. And, there are trade mitigation opportunities. A good organization like ours and others like us, talk about foreign trade zones, talk about free trade agreements that exist, the USMCA, Israeli free trade agreements. So many exist that you may or may not be participating in. And then a sourcing analysis. As we outlined, not everybody after the 9th is going to have the same 10% peanut butter spread. It's going to move. So look at where you can maneuver and navigate your sourcing. And then also some basic blocking and tackling, entry audits, process reviews. These are important, especially as programming with customs rolls out quickly. We've learned that some of their auto check protocols have been turned off because they can't accommodate the number of tariff lines that the entries are showing up with. So customs themselves have had to take some shortcuts in programming, which puts more burden on the importer. So looking at getting that expertise to support a wide range of these trade concerns.
Fantastic.
We only talked about the reciprocal tariffs. We didn't talk about the announcement that de minimis has been mitigated out of China. We didn't talk about the announcement of the implementation of the 232 on the automotive parts and vehicles that were finalized on that section 232. So the breadth of situations that might be at your doorstep is concerning, and to have access to a variety of experts with people with knowledge in a variety of areas of the trade compliance concerns, that's where you want to get in front of that and get in front of it quickly.
Yeah, we're helping a lot of our clients understand the duty stacking, where rates stack, where they don't stack, and really understand their exposure. And we're happy to do it for you as well. We're happy to talk you through bond saturation issues that are likely to arise. We're happy to talk through working capital issues, things like that. And again, this is all expected to have a knock-on effect for the ocean freight market as well, which we can talk about in another episode. So,
yeah. Well, like we joked earlier, I had a call last night from a friend who bought a RAV4. Dealership said it's not in, it's coming from Japan. He called me freaking out, thinking he was going to have to pay the tariffs on it. Wow.
What's in your contract, right?
What's in your contract, right?
That's
You
the
know,
answer. So,
but reach out to your friends, to your, I'd like to consider you a friend. You've subscribed, you've hit like, we love you. Reach out to your friends. We're happy to help.
and debate us down below or bring your thoughts. We appreciate it. Make us smarter. We're just borderline, and it's a little concerning. Thank you for your time today, Kenton. It's been fun as always.
Mhm. I've enjoyed it.
Everybody
Thanks,
else
Anthony.
signing out. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.